This story is about a little boy named Hinata. He had been wanting to learn magic from a witch he had been admiring. When he finally had a chance to ask her, she kept her cool when she accepted him as her apprentice. But she was so happy that she fainted most of the time when she was interacting with her pupil. This witch is Esmeralda. Due to the sudden burst of her happy emotions, she knew she might do dangerous things to Hinata, so she cast magic on her hat to protect her dignity. Hinata kept learning from her, but some things turned around into situations that made their hearts pound. Esmeralda could feel her feelings burning inside, but she couldn't tell him because he was only looking up to her like a witch. She may have become so possessive at times, but their story was cute, fun, and weird, I guess. You will eventually understand why, so let us dig into this story. It was known that witches used evil magic, which they obtained from making contracts with demons. An evil witch was said to have lived on top of a remote hill for over 100 years. The witch was rumored to be 2 meters tall and could curse you with a single look. Outside the manor, a boy was building his confidence, for he had already planned to be Esmeralda's apprentice, the Cursed Eye Witch. The boy came inside despite knowing nobody dared to approach the manor out of fear, but he thought of learning magic from the best. He halted when he heard an eerie voice behind him. He turned around and saw the witch looking straight through his soul. The kid was left speechless, maybe because he barely saw her face because of those huge hats. The witch spoke, asking what he was doing there, but the boy felt his heart pounding. He stumbled a little when he asked her to teach him some magic. He flinched when the witch started making weird noises on the side. She glanced back at him and spoke something that a normal human couldn't understand. It was just pure horror for a typical kid. He wondered if he was already being cursed, and when the witch came closer, he closed his eyes, letting his fate be done. He was shocked when he found himself resting on her chest, arms. The boy's heart was racing, and he wondered if this was her other spell, so he immediately ran and told her he would return in a minute. He ran outside and rested his back on the wall to breathe some air. He placed his hand on his chest and felt his heart still pounding. His eyes suddenly shone, and he said that witches are so amazing, making him more eager to become her apprentice. Meanwhile, Esmeralda was looking outside the window, at him, actually. She was so mesmerized that she thought the boy was cute because she had never seen a human boy up close. She stood up and decided to wait to meet him again. This witch could join the Lakers, they need a center. But she couldn't help but stare at his cute little face, but her face and voice got scarier from the tension. The next day, the kid had gathered all his courage to make the witch acknowledge him as her pupil. He could still remember that trembling scenario yesterday, but had to be careful now. He knocked on the door and immediately heard her telling him to come in. He went in and saw her stroking her cat. Those proportions were out of the window, I guess. The kid was still in awe of her height. He managed to greet her with a hello, so Esmeralda asked if he really wanted to be her apprentice. The boy nodded and said yes. The witch asked if he was ready and explained that he should make a contract with a witch. He needed to pay the price set by the witch. She added that the humans in the past had offered their eyes, arms, hearts, and many more to be taught with demonic powers. She looked at him and asked if he had prepared something. The boy was caught off guard. He paused for a moment, thinking what to offer the witch, but he told the witch to let the witch get what she wanted. The witch's eyes widened, and she said a part of his body taken out wouldn't mean anything. The boy gasped and assumed that the witch wanted to take his whole body, so he told her he wouldn't do it if he had to give his entire body. He froze when the witch grabbed his face and told him he didn't need to do anything. He seemed to be confused, but he became more confused when she started petting and stroking his hair. She contained the cuteness spree but ended up telling him he did not have to offer anything and stayed by her side forever. The boy gasped and moved away from confusement. The witch apologized for the sudden intrusive burst of thoughts and suggested a better way. She asked for his hand and laid on his lap to make him pat her head. He finally became an apprentice. Despite her terrifying looks, he had to be brave. He walked to her and showed her the broom she asked to be fixed. The witch glanced at it and said they shall now begin the test. She told him to get on the broom and try floating in the air. She added that if he couldn't do basic magic, there would be a problem. The boy nervously placed the broom between his legs because he had never used magic before. He was sweating cold and tried to focus. He felt the broom moving but was caught off guard and lost balance. He groaned in pain and apologized for failing. He sat up and said he didn't have any talent for magic. He went silent when Esmeralda stood up. The fire on her hand emerges into the air and suddenly explodes when she says it was a failure. The boy gasped in fear when she said she didn't need a failure. But he was even more surprised when the witch said she didn't need a defective tool with poor balancing. She grabbed her broom and told him to try using her broom instead. She added that using magic had to be about one's heart and confidence. She told him not to be scared and that she would support him, so the boy nodded and closed his eyes. He focused his heart and mind on it, and in a matter of seconds, he was flying in the air. He was so happy, so when he hopped off, he thanked her and apologized for having someone like him as her pupil. The witch grabbed his face. She shook her head and said he did great. Those bright smiles made his cheeks hot, and he thought his master wasn't that scary at all. Esmeralda told him they had to find a proper broom that would work for him, so he told her he would give her a ride when he learned. Esmeralda suddenly whispered ununderstandable words, but she was actually dying from his cuteness. He wasn't still used to being randomly scared, I guess. After a few days of learning from her, she sometimes scares the kid with her weird cuteness attack. The kid suddenly asked for her name, but the witch was confused as to why a human would want to know the name a devil gave her. The kid took his bag and said he found a book. He pulled the paper and said it was a magic spell to befriend someone. She was told to write her name on the left side of the paper. She took his book and asked if she studied it and made all the notes on his own. When the boy excitedly said yes, he gasped when a dark swallowed his books. The witch told him she hated bogus spells masquerading as magic the most. Those books were nothing but superstitions that didn't even work, so she forbade him from studying magic from the wrong things. He was about to walk, but the witch created a hole below him, and he fell somewhere dark. He groaned in pain and screamed, asking where he was. She told him he had to stay there for a while, so he thought he was discarded for not being worthy of teaching magic. But he was surprised when he felt something soft. The witch was beside him, telling him that this was her library, where books she had collected all over the world were stored. She added that she would teach him the correct knowledge of magic. The kid groaned and told his master he couldn't concentrate at this rate because the place was too cramped for them. But she told him it couldn't be helped because too many books were taking up a lot of space. After a few hours, their lesson was done. When she was gone, he suddenly remembered it was being presumptuous for befriending his master. He took it out and noticed her name was written, so he asked why she put her name when she said it was just superstition. The woman said it was just for fun. She was embarrassed for doing it, so she told him to hand it over to throw it. But when he read her name out loud, Esmeralda, he said it was such a beautiful name. The witch's cheeks turned red as he heard his little voice calling for her name. After some days of being her apprentice, he couldn't get used to her and was a bit scared of her. When he was asked to clean a cauldron, the size of the furniture was too big for him, so things like this were hard for him, like reaching the bottom of the cauldron. He tried to scrub the bottom but ended up losing balance. He screamed as the cauldron wobbled, and he fell to the ground. He immediately stood up, ignoring the pain when he remembered the fallen cauldron. His eyes widened when he saw a piece of it broken. He froze when he felt her behind, saying it was sad. He started panicking, telling her he should find another one like this for her. But Esmeralda told him she didn't need a new one since it wouldn't be the same. He picked up the small pieces and said he should try to fix them, at least. But she grabbed him and said she shouldn't have left them to him. The kid closed his eyes in nervousness. His heart was pounding when she lifted him and felt her melons resting on his abdomen. She told him he would bring him to her room to heal him. He got so embarrassed and asked her to put him down. But Esmeralda told him to be a good boy because his knee was bleeding. The kid got confused, and when he glanced at his knee, he saw blood dripping from his wound. He said that her cauldron would be more important to fix than him, but he gasped when the cauldron exploded to ashes. He chuckled awkwardly when she said she could just replace it. She placed him on her bed slowly, but he flinched when she lay beside him and placed her hand on his knee. He felt like two worlds were lying on him. Esmeralda told him she would apply medicine to heal it slowly and naturally instead of using magic. He tried to scooch away from her, but she told him not to move. He was getting uncomfortable, but when it was done, he was told to rest for the day. He sighed and apologized for not being useful to her. She looked back and told him not to rush himself too much. She walked out of the room while keeping her cool, but she released her smile when she closed the door. She couldn't believe a little human was sleeping in her bed. She was pacing back and forth, so hyped up thinking about how cute he was. She was trying to calm herself, but suddenly tripped and fell injured on the floor. She ended up lying on the bed with him, making me wonder what kind of fall made her hat injured. The next day, they were studying magic. He was staring at her, making him wonder what she was thinking. I bet you wouldn't want to know, dear. We had been talking about this little kid, and his name was actually Hinata. Esmeralda noticed him staring at her, so she asked if he had any questions. He asked how she made her water snake, but the creature suddenly spoke and told him he was a dragon. She gave him a cup of water and tasked him to manipulate it. She added that he needed to calm his mind and not to think too hard. He placed his hands around it, putting all of his strength into it, but the witch stopped him, telling him his mind was all over the place. He was flustered because she was too close. Esmeralda told him to stay focused, but he was so distracted by her. He gasped when the water suddenly splashed in the air and fell on her chest. Hinata was speechless. The witch wiped it off, so he apologized, telling her he would bring her some clean clothes. She grabbed the end of her dress and squeezed the water out. She sighed, pulled her leg up, and said her legs were wet too. She asked him to wipe it for her. Hinata grabbed a clean cloth and wiped her legs while his eyes closed. She sighed and said she might catch a cold at this rate while Hinata was trying to reach her wet hair, but he barely touched it because she was too tall. He tried to tip his toe, but due to the water on the floor, he slipped and lost balance. He tried to find something to grab on to prevent any injuries, but Hinata might have grabbed something else. He moved his hand a little and said she was wet underneath as well. Esmeralda got embarrassed and pulled her skirt down. The water from the sink exploded like her mind was in turmoil right now. Everything was soaked in water at this point. Hinata looked at her and asked if she was all right. His heart was pounding in nervousness when she glanced at him, drenched in water, and said that was embarrassing. Hinata is a perv. Lucky bastards like this make me wanna end this world. She stood up, moved closer to him, and said Hinata made the first move, but it was all an accident. When she asked if accidents were fine, she faked a slip and fell on top of him when Hinata knew it was on purpose. He crawled to her hat when she started telling him to close his eyes if that was not charming enough. Before she could reach him, he placed her hat on her, instantly calming her. He hurried back and chased his breath. Esmeralda looked at him with her cold eyes, asking what he was doing. Hinata was confused and asked if she remembered anything. She touched her hat and said she had embedded a powerful magic control on her hat, which would be dangerous to take off. She suddenly realized his question and asked if she did anything weird. Hinata said no, so she was relieved. He stared at her for a moment and thought what happened was dangerous in many ways. Hinata smiled and told her she was charming. Esmeralda was caught off guard and thanked him. Behind his little head, he thought of his master as cute and sexy. He suddenly blushed when he noticed her undergarments, so he told her about it, but she ignored it and told him to pay attention. We can all agree that this witch is a bit of an airhead. Hinata placed the bags of lizard tails, elf navel sesame, and oak splinters on the table for the potion his master was making. He started to make some coffee for Esmeralda, and after a few minutes, she took the coffee and placed a cup on the table. She told him to drink it up, so he undoubtedly took it because he was so thirsty. When he had a taste of it, he split it out and started whining about its bitter taste. She wiped off the liquid and said she only wanted to see the effects of her potion. Hinata sighed and told her not to use him as a test subject. She suggested putting lots of sugar and milk in it, so Hinata gathered all of his courage for his master. Esmeralda suddenly said there was an easier way to drink it. Hinata smiled widely and asked what magic it was. He went speechless when she placed him on her lap, squeezing him to her chest to open his mouth. Hinata was dumbfounded when she started shoving a spoon into his mouth, so she pulled a booklet for a baby, saying it was a method to make humans drink medicine. He exclaimed that he was already 12 and not a baby, but she said everyone was a baby to her since she was over 200 years old. She pulled the ice cream out and said she would give it to him if he drank it. He started stumbling on his words while saying it wouldn't work on him, but ended up taking the medicine and the ice cream. Esmeralda was so happy as she patted his head. She continued giving him the medicine while saying he was a good boy. She said that praising was said to make humans happily comply. When they were done, she asked if he enjoyed it, but he shook his head intensely. She lifted him high. Hinata giggled in the air, so Esmeralda said he was obviously enjoying it. When he was put down, he sighed after realizing his master was treating him like a kid again. He went to the table to find the list of things he needed to buy, but he noticed the paper on the table, and it was about how to make a recovery medicine. He looked at his body and realized he didn't feel tired anymore. She suddenly popped out of the door, telling him to get ready. Hinata walked to her, looking at her straight in her eyes, and thanked her for making his body energized. He said her magic was the best and ran out of the house to buy the ingredients. Esmeralda was left there speechless. Her cheeks were burning, and thought being praised made her want to try her best more. Inside the manor, Esmeralda could be heard asking if Hinata could feel it. She leaned closer and told him to let it all out with her calming voice. Hinata groaned and said he was almost there. He screamed when something came out, which was a tiny flame between his palms. She asked if that was all he got, so he said fire magic wasn't that easy. She stood up and said it was too early for him to handle magic, but he said he really wanted to learn it. She asked why, and he said he wanted to look cool when he said, "Dare to touch me, and you'll get burned." She sighed and said he shouldn't learn magic just to be cool because magic is holy. He started whining a little, saying he wanted to look cool toward people like her. She chuckled and said she had never shown anyone her magic, so she told him not to say it so proudly because it made her sad. He turned around and sneaked a little fire out. Esmeralda stopped him and told him not to overdo himself. She blew air on his head, asking if he could feel it. She squeezed her body to him and told him not to be so immature and release the pathetic, shabby thing. Esmeralda said magic needs emotions as a medium, and just wanting to be cool was such an impure motive. Hinata exclaimed that he wanted to learn it despite having impure motives, as he just wanted to show her what he could do. He wanted to look cool in front of her because he liked his master. That outburst of emotion caught her off guard, but she was shocked when a blazing fire came out of Hinata's hands. He smiled excitedly, thanking his master for helping him. She sighed and looked at his burning hat. Hinata was so amazed by what he did that he kept thanking her, making Esmeralda wonder what she did to help him because she was teasing him earlier. On Hinata's next training, he was scratching his head because he was having a hard time studying his master's recovery potion recipe. Esmeralda told him to freely ask her if he doesn't understand something. Hinata nodded and kept his focus on his work, but suddenly, a loud bang came from his mixture. She rushed to him and stared at his work. She was pacing back and forth as the process went on. Hinata kept his focus on his work, making her anxious about why he wasn't asking anything. She wondered if he was scared to ask. Out of frustration, she decided to snap her finger in the air, and in an instant, the surroundings glitched and turned into a classroom. He looked around and saw that he was the only one there. Esmeralda stepped inside, and Hinata was wondering how he got inside the magic academy he used to attend. She greeted him good morning and placed a table and chair beside him. Hinata was surprised to see her in different clothes. She said she was just turning his subconscious thoughts into reality so she could figure out what was obstructing his studies. Hinata raised his brows and thought she was just showing off her interest in cosplay. She sighed, ignoring what he said, and told him she would be his classmate for that day and treat them as equals. She asked what he was called in his school, but he said he was only called Hinata. She said it was lame, and she was called a pale, gloomy black cloak because she had wanted to be a witch when she was younger. But that sounds like they were only making fun of her. He suddenly remembered how he got into detention because he couldn't make a beginner potion. She asked if his friends didn't teach him about it. That day, during their potion-making lesson, he was very anxious because he could hear everyone saying he was the only one who couldn't make the potion. He avoided eye contact with Esmeralda and said it was because he was a loser. They looked outside when they heard the bell ring. She pushed her chair back and placed her legs on her table. She ordered Hinata to go buy her some yakisoba bun, making him wonder where the equal standing went. She got confused because she thought it was a normal way for humans to socialize, but Hinata didn't like society at all. She shrugged her shoulders and said her memories from 100 years ago had gotten foggy, making him wonder how she was so brazenly wrong. She said learning wouldn't be inefficient if he kept telling her about her mistakes. She added that it was fine because there was no one there who would make fun of him. The assurance and safety he felt was so light to his heart. Esmeralda stood up and asked what he wanted to eat, so Hinata started reciting his long list of orders, making her feel what someone would feel in that position. He pulled a paper out for his last request and asked her to teach him about a question later. Seeing his cute little face, she went out so excitedly, and Esmeralda started feeling sleepy when they ate all the food. When they finished, they went to the woods, but Esmeralda noticed Hinata being restless. She asked why he was looking around, and he said monsters usually appear in that area. Just after he said that, he screamed in fear when something jumped at him. She said it was only a small fry. She exclaimed that a magician should never let go of their pride, and Hinata needed to go through rough training. He started feeling nervous about it, and after a few seconds, they arrived at a cave filled with monsters. Esmeralda told him they had to reach the cave's end and return at ease. She chuckled devilishly and said the monsters she had prepared inside were all harmless, but those monsters looked like hungry zombies when they came in. Esmeralda kept screaming in fear while Hinata carried her along the way. She hugged him tightly and said the monsters weren't that scary. Hugging her was so pathetic, but Hinata groaned and said she was the one hugging him. He suddenly realized that he could hear her racing heartbeat. He thought that his master prepared all of this for him even if she didn't like it. They continued walking in the middle of these scary monsters. When she grabbed his wrist to walk beside him, his heart pounded. She told him not to let go of her hand, making him think it was presumptuous to want to protect his master. The place suddenly went dark. He lost the grip of his master. He patted in the air to find her, and when he touched her, he sighed and said her skin felt really weird. He was saying it was rough and fatty when he heard Esmeralda behind him. Hinata was speechless after realizing she was a few meters away from him. The monster started growling at him, so he turned and was surprised to see a giant monster. Esmeralda was dumbfounded and thought she did not prepare this monster, so when the wild monster attacked Hinata, he screamed from the bottom of his lungs. Esmeralda came to the rescue. She faced the gargoyle, an apex predator, and told him not to lay a finger on her student. She glared at it and released some of her magic powers. She ignited her power and threatened the monster to destroy him, so the gargoyle felt a shiver down his spine and immediately sprinted off. This wild creature knows at a glance the difference in their power. She gazed at him worriedly. She walked to Hinata and apologized for putting him in danger. Hinata grabbed her hands tightly and told her to wait for him until he got stronger so he could protect her when she got into trouble. Her cheeks turned red, and she couldn't help but embrace him tightly. The monsters earlier walked to them, cleared their throat, and asked if they could leave now. Esmeralda apologized and told them they could go home now. There was one time when Hinata was running late for his errands. Esmeralda started to become worried, but after a few minutes, Hinata came in. He apologized for being 30 minutes late. When she looked at him, there were remains of the monsters who hurt him. She asked what happened, and he explained that he forgot to use the monster repelling bell and got attacked. Hinata went through the sharp hills, then across the river, until he got into the jungle filled with monsters. She sighed and said he could have taken a broom to fly, which would only take 20 minutes. He chuckled and said he was nervous because he hadn't tried flying long distances. Esmeralda suddenly realized that time is money. She took her broom and ordered him to take his and start their training right away. The two went out and flew in the air. Hinata felt like he might fall. He was feeling scared, so Esmeralda told him she would assist him. After a few assuring words, he smiled and figured he shouldn't give up right away. He tried to drive the broom to the side, which made her heart go crazy. She groaned and wanted to close her eyes because she was too worried for him, so she thought of something else. They moved down and decided to teach him spatial movement. It was basically teleporting. Hinata was tasked to teleport before her, so he slashed his arm to activate a magic circle they had been practicing. After a few seconds, his body slowly disappeared, and the moment he opened his eyes, everything was dark. He got confused about where he was, but he was actually inside her dress. They ended up going back to the house. Hinata kept apologizing to his master, so Esmeralda could only think of one way to solve this problem. She looked at him, and she also had to prepare herself for this, making Hinata nervous. He looked around when the place became blurry. Every corner of the room was being distorted, so Esmeralda told him not to move because he might get trapped inside this mysterious magic. He felt like he was about to vomit from the gravity pulling him around. He fell on the floor, and when he looked around, his eyes widened. The place was so clean and new. He stood up to look around the area. He asked whose room it was, but when he looked outside the door, he saw his master's manor. He suddenly wondered if this room had been there all the time. He heard her say it was just a newly formed room for him. He was caught off guard when she asked him to live there with her. Hinata couldn't say a word in shock, so Esmeralda started to become worried. She cursed inside her head and thought he might suddenly get scared for saying something like that. She explained that she wasn't trying to force him and she was just suggesting that he do it. Hinata looked down with a smile on his face and said he would love to stay there if he would not be a bother to her. Esmeralda's face was unreadable. The color of her face faded, and she fainted because of too much happiness. I guess she wasn't prepared enough for this. When Esmeralda was still resting, Hinata went to roam around the bath inside the manor. He looked around and noticed the families living there were so relaxed. He couldn't still sink it in that he was now living with his master. When he was taking a bath, he thought the place was so big. But suddenly, he heard his master humming a song nearby. He was speechless after realizing it was really his master. She was on the other side washing herself. He was so thankful she didn't notice him. He peeked a little and realized Esmeralda was usually like this if she was alone. She was so careless and looked happy. She gathered some bubbles, made a mustache, and even a horn on her head. She was playing like a child. She was so absorbed in it that she didn't care about her surroundings. He was about to sneak out of the bath when he felt something rubbing behind him. He screamed a little, and when he turned, he saw the familiar covered in leaves. Esmeralda kept her eyes closed and asked if what she heard was a Lorun. She called her to wash her back, but the familiar thought she was doing the right job on the right person. Hinata was so nervous because the familiar got the wrong person. When Esmeralda asked if everything was all right, Hinata thought he might be found at this rate, so he silently walked behind her and washed her back. He kept his eyes closed, thinking he would be done if she realized it was him. She sighed and asked to wash her properly, so she grabbed his wrist to use more force. His body was shaking as he rubbed the sides of her melons. Esmeralda suddenly spoke and said something good happened earlier. She opened the faucet and said she found the bath too big for her and had been wishing to be with someone. He froze when he realized a mirror was in front of them. When she splashed her face with water and opened her eyes, she was about to say her wish was fulfilled, but she went silent. After realizing Hinata was behind her, she screamed and stood up in shock. Hinata screamed, maybe because he saw the dark cave. He apologized for not thinking she would enter the bath after he entered. She sighed and said it couldn't be helped since they were not living together. Hinata frowned his eyebrows as he noticed her face turning into a tomato. In an instant, she lost consciousness from embarrassment. Esmeralda was brought to a chair nearby. A Lorun was fanning her leaves, and when Esmeralda woke up, Hinata offered some water and properly apologized to her. She took the glass and told him not to worry about it. She looked at him and asked how much he saw. Hinata was caught off guard but shocked when she noticed him chuckling. He said he had never seen her playful side, which was cute. She couldn't believe it, so she started pulling his towel and said he should also show her a side she had never seen before. He begged her to stop but freaked out when she said, "All right, now we're even." While this was happening, the familiar was watching them in awe. After their bath, the rain started to pour heavily. The black cat underneath the table was shivering in fear. Hinata noticed that the cat, Pepinero, didn't eat his food. He called for his master and said her cat wasn't eating, but he halted when he saw her hiding underneath the table. He called her, and she was startled that she bumped her head on the table. Esmeralda was shaking in fear as well. He asked what happened to them because the two had suddenly acted strangely. A loud thunder strike was heard. Esmeralda asked if he couldn't feel the huge magic power getting closer. When she said it was her master coming, he imagined an ugly, scary witch. When the lights on the candles went off, she stood up as she figured her master had arrived. A menacing book suddenly emerged from the floor. The eye on the book was glaring at them. It released an intense amount of mana that would send anyone to their knees. However, Hinata was curious. He was wondering if her master was a book. The book suddenly spoke, saying her name was Krista Leone, and she came there because she heard Esmeralda had got herself a pupil. She added that it was compulsory to swear an oath to become a member of the Krista family. Hinata couldn't believe a book was speaking to him. He shrieked when the book stated his name, age, height, favorite food, and that he was wetting the bed until 2 years ago. The book teleported before his face and said she knew those because her demon eyes could know everything at a glance. The book opened, and he was told to read the contract first. She asked which part of his body he would offer, but Esmeralda suddenly stood up. The surge of braveness and courage to protect him suddenly was pressed when she felt her master's menacing aura. Her heart became filled with fear and anxiety from the power difference. Esmeralda couldn't move her feet, making Hinata wonder what kind of power this book has to make her like this. The book tells Hinata to do as she says to make things easier, but Esmeralda does not stop. She stood before Hinata while panting for air. The book was surprised that her disciple could now move despite feeling her presence. Esmeralda exclaimed that she would never show mercy if she hurt Hinata and wouldn't care if she was banished. The book was speechless from the drama. Hinata suddenly moved to the front and said he wouldn't want his master to suffer now that he had decided to become her disciple. Esmeralda faced him and whispered he didn't know the true horrors of her master, but he said he was just worried about her. The book remained silent, and Hinata noticed it. The huge book shrank in a second and fell on the floor, revealing a small girl holding her face. There was blood dripping from her nose as she wondered what kind of a relationship the two had. Hinata wouldn't believe there was a girl behind that book, but Esmeralda's master said she couldn't let this relationship go. Esmeralda's heart was racing when Krista paused. She continued her sentence and said it would be so cool if their relationship continued. Esmeralda's face slammed in disbelief. Krista said that she loved the idea of a forbidden love between a witch and a human. She wobbled around and said their relationship was so good that she would cry for it. Hinata asked what was happening, and she said that the little girl was her master, who enjoyed messing with her. Krista was lying on the floor like she was daydreaming when suddenly she jumped, pointing at them holding each other's hands. She couldn't believe they were really doing it. Hinata asked if she was a middle schooler, but Krista ignored it and said she would be approving their relationship and that he would be her new favorite. She smiled with a peaceful face and said she would root for the Esme-Hina ship until the end. She skipped towards them happily and said she was excited to watch a new romance bloom. Esmeralda sighed and said it was nothing like that. But Krista ignored her and continued her fantasy. That lunch, they were sitting over a soup Esmeralda had made. Hinata said it was delicious, but suddenly, Krista came out, saying it was alright and asking for seconds. The two stared at her as they thought she had already left. Hinata greeted her, but Esmeralda asked why she came back. Krista explained it was only natural for families to eat together. Esmeralda pushed her to make her go away. Krista called her stingy, so Esmeralda called her a midget. The two called each other names, but suddenly, Krista asked if she would be fine not revealing her feelings for Hinata. She added that she even changed the flavor of his drink to make an effort. She sighed and told Esmeralda that Hinata hadn't noticed anything. Esmeralda felt hot on her cheeks and said she didn't care about it, but she couldn't escape the demon's eyes of her master. She took out her book to search for fashionable clothes to wear using magic. Esmeralda thanked her with a cold tone and said they only have a master-student relationship and nothing more. Krista did not argue anymore and watched her. Esmeralda took the hamburger she cooked and served it to him since she remembered it was his favorite. Hinata was in awe by the presentation of the food, and it even had a drawing of him on it. When he gazed back at her to thank her, Hinata was shocked to see her in different but beautiful clothes. She smiled and said she made it with her magic. She giggled and asked how she looked. Hinata said she did look pretty in it, but he was more amazed at how she could create clothes like this with magic. He started asking how she did it and begged her to teach him. Esmeralda wasn't expecting this response, so she started sulking. Krista approached her and said the child still couldn't differentiate between feelings of love and looking up to witches. She was about to advise her to be more assertive, but Esmeralda stopped her. She returned to her usual clothing and decided to throw away her useless feelings and teach him real magic. Krista remained silent when Hinata called her. Esmeralda looked at him and said they should start their magic training now, but her words were cut off when a small ribbon popped on her hair. He smiled and said he could only do this and he would want to create cute clothes someday because she looked pretty in those clothes just now. Krista asked if she could stay, so Esmeralda said she could stay there freely. She sat on the table and started saying she liked stronger flavors for her foods, no onions, and a pudding for dessert. Esmeralda sighed and instantly regretted her decision. After a few hours, Esmeralda and Hinata went to a room for an art lesson. Hinata was glad to know they were doing something different from magic, but Esmeralda got confused and said it wasn't a magic lesson. The dragon on the canvas suddenly moved and emerged from the surface. The dragon flew into the air and whirled around Hinata. He was so amazed that Esmeralda explained that drawings made with magic paint could be controlled like puppets. Hinata excitedly took his drawing and commanded his thunder dragon to come out. Something that I couldn't explain emerged. It would seem like he needed to practice arts before the magic because then look like my 7 days old poop. She reminded him that drawing what he liked was the perfect way to practice art. Hinata immediately said he liked witches. Krista suddenly appeared, patted Esmeralda's shoulder, and said she could be a fine model. Esmeralda did not hesitate and struck a pose on the floor. Krista told her to spread her legs a bit more, so Hinata began his artwork. Krista stood up and said there was something off, so she cast magic on Esmeralda, and in an instant, she was screaming in shock because she was naked. She scolded her master for doing it, but Krista said her clothes were in the way of sketching the body. She moved closer and told her this would be her chance to have Hinata look at her as a woman. Hinata was about to say it would be fine with the setup earlier, but Krista stopped him and said his master had gone this far for him, looking like some sick exhibitionist for him to learn. Esmeralda stood up and told him to start painting. She exclaimed that this would be purely educational, so she told him to move closer to draw her correctly. Her hat came off, so she had gone wild now. Hinata had difficulty drawing her because she kept wiggling and squishing her melons while Krista kept cheering for them in the back. Esmeralda suddenly pushed him to the floor and moved above him, saying touching her would be the best way to grasp her structure. This witch had gone wild, and Hinata's soul almost left his body from this traumatic scene. He jumped out and said he couldn't do it anymore because this wasn't the type of painting he wanted to paint. Esmeralda gasped and asked if he wasn't interested in her. She started sulking on the floor, so her master cheered her up. Hinata walked to her and dressed her. He said that the witch he wanted to paint was the powerful, smart, kind, and cool witch he knew. He placed her hat and said it was his master that he wanted to draw. Esmeralda stared at him dumbfoundedly. Hinata chuckled and said that face was what he wanted to paint. The two sat on their chairs to start the art session while Krista kept an eye on them. After a few minutes, Hinata was done and showed it to Esmeralda. That artwork seemed like Hinata needed to learn a different kind of magic that is not related to art. The following day, Hinata was playing with Pepanero. He was rubbing her belly, but Esmeralda scolded her for getting on the desk while she was mixing potions. She shoved the cat away, but the cat hissed angrily and jumped at her. Esmeralda lost grip on the potion, and it fell on the floor. The liquid inside the glass splattered all over the place. He looked at Pepanero to check her, but to his shock, a woman wearing extra small undies with cat ears. The woman called Hinata and asked him to pet her more. She said that she liked him because he always takes care of her. Krista walked to the broken glass and figured the potion had caused these sudden alterations. Hinata finally realizes this clingy woman, and Pepinur is one. She crawled to him and patted his body, amazed by the human body. She said she would make him feel good for taking care of her. He felt nervous when she started licking his face like a cat. He asked for help from Krista, but she only said it would return to normal when it slept. Hinata suddenly heard his master groaning in pain. He turned to look at her and was shocked to see cat ears on her. Esmeralda purred like a cat. She crawled to him and called his name. It looks like she got hit with some of the potion. She wrapped her arms around him and mounted on him to display dominance. Pepinero felt threatened, so she pulled him away from her and told her she would crush him with her big old body. She added that Hinata would be better off with someone smaller and cute like her. Esmeralda got mad and said size had nothing to do with it. The two fought for a moment, and Hinata found himself between the two with their melons pressing on him. Hinata begged them to stop arguing, but they did not listen. Pepinero said Hinata loves scratching her chin on his knees, making Esmeralda speechless because Hinata never did that to her. The two gasped when Hinata grabbed their necks closer. The two went from wild cats to purring, calm kittens. Hinata scratched their chins and told them to stop fighting. He said he liked both of them. A few seconds later, Pepinero had gone to sleep and returned to her original form. Hinata looked at his master and wondered why his master wasn't back to normal yet. He suddenly remembered her sad face when Pepinero said Esmeralda hadn't experienced his chin scratches. He hugged her tight and said his master was so big and lovely. Esmeralda was speechless from it, while Hinata wondered why she hadn't returned to normal. Krista knew she had returned to normal and was taking advantage of the situation. Some few days later, Krista had gone somewhere, and suddenly, a letter came in saying that Krista was inviting them to a witch convention. The two did not hesitate and went there as soon as possible. Hinata was so giddy because he could see many witches. Esmeralda scolded him for letting his guard down because conventions were events where witches did demonic rituals. She couldn't predict what these witches would do if a human would come to the convention. He looked around and noticed a reception desk. Esmeralda had just said he shouldn't let them find out he's a human, but she heard Hinata greeting the witches at the reception. The witches halted him and asked if he was a human. She cursed in the air, but she was stopped when two witches found her suspicious and started a search on her body. She did not notice Hinata got tied up and brought to a room nearby. The witch brought him in and announced that they had a human intruder. The witch with light hair said a human magic user was useless. The one with a mask said they should make it as a sacrifice instead. The two were playing cards, so the short-haired witch scolded them for playing in the office when Master Krista left the event operations up to them. The two sighed and looked at Hinata. They looked at him closer. This was their first time seeing a human up close. The short-haired witch asked what his business was there, so Hinata explained Krista invited them there and his passion for the witch's magic led him to become an apprentice. When he said his name was Hinata, their eyes widened in shock. They scanned him from head to toe, and it was the same name as the human in the witch's apprentice story. The two suggested checking if he was the real Hinata and not a cosplayer. They gathered around him to see if he was the same as in the book. Hinata was so confused, and right on time, Esmeralda found them and was shocked to see the current situation. The three were squeezing their bodies against him, and the one with the face mask was licking his face as they thought the Hinata in the book liked these things. Esmeralda was so angry that she snatched him away from them. She checked up on him and asked if he liked it better on her. The three scoffed and said, "What is your problem, Goliath?" Esmeralda placed him down and faced them. She proudly said she was Hinata's one and only master, and before she could say her name, the three yelled her name excitedly. They started spitting out words like they couldn't believe they were real. When they took out their merch and asked for their sign, Esmeralda got confused about why they had plushies of them. A familiar voice spoke, telling Esmeralda to thank her for those. It was her master, Krista. She asked what was happening, so Krista said this convention was her sponsorship. It was a witch-authored doujin market. Hinata got confused and asked what it was, so she explained they brought a lot of work together, and their story was on top sale. So basically, everyone in that place was a fan of them. Hinata was stoned to the floor when a swarm of witches approached him. They were all amazed and starstruck to see the human Hinata in person. The witches showed off their magic and said they could teach him any kind of magic, making his eyes shine in amazement. He started to feel overwhelmed by the various magic lessons being offered to him, making the persons in charge of the event worry because these witches might take Hinata. She was starting to become worried because Hinata might choose another witch to become his master. Krista sighed and said she should not keep her hopes high because many other witches are talented and confident with their powers. Hinata suddenly spoke. He apologized and told them he couldn't be their apprentice because he still had so much magic to learn from his master. He added that he couldn't stop being her apprentice because he still had to know why his heart pounded hard when she first hugged him. A brave witch crawled to Hinata and said she could easily teach him that kind of magic. She told him to close his eyes and was about to lean for a kiss. The authorized person for the event got worried about the situation in Esmeralda, but when they looked for her, she was already gone. Krista chuckled, though her apprentice had finally gotten the nerve. Now going back, the witches were cheering on the witch who was about to kiss Hinata. They told her to go for it already, but the woman said she couldn't move. She gasped when she noticed her arms were frozen. The other witches were covered with hot wind that stings their skin. They screamed in pain, and suddenly, they heard Esmeralda speaking in his scary tone, saying that she could teach all of their magic by herself alone. The three witches felt shivers down their spines and ran away to escape this freak. The three witches earlier were relieved because there was no more fuss about their event. They knew the two would end up being together. Hinata didn't hear them as his focus was on her. He said her magic was amazing, but he was shocked when Esmeralda moved closer to his face. They all went silent when they witnessed her placing a peck on his cheeks. The witches watching them were left in shock. Hinata couldn't move because he could hear his own heart pumping so fast. He couldn't believe it was the same magic when they first met. He asked what it was, but Esmeralda said it was too soon for her to tell him, so she told him to wait. Krista had called for a celebration because their doujin got sold like hotcakes. Hinata was wondering why the books were so thin. He tried to peek inside, but Esmeralda covered his eyes and said not to look. What would happen now to their blooming relationship? Will Esmeralda wait until Hinata gets to the right age before revealing everything? Let us find out in the next episode. If you like this kind of video, leave a comment, like, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day.